Hello, and welcome to Life Diaries, a space where the pages of life open up, one story at a time. These are tales written by experience, spoken from the heart. Take a moment for yourself, and let's begin. Eleanor stepped into the yard, and the bright spring sun made her squint for a moment. Looking around, she couldn't help but smile again. How beautiful it was! The apple trees were in full bloom, covered in delicate pink buds. The emerald lawn grass reached up to the bright blue sky, across which fluffy white clouds drifted. In the sun-drenched playground, a little girl soared, swinging rhythmically. Pretty, in a light white sundress, with long chestnut hair that would fly up and then fall down. "So, here you are." Eleanor smiled and headed towards the swings. The little one, noticing her, laughed heartily and stopped swinging. The swing, obeying inertia, slowly came to a halt. "What, is it time for breakfast already?" the girl asked, looking directly at Eleanor with her wide-open eyes. Eleanor nodded, and for the umpteenth time, her heart ached at the thought of how this little one's fate could have turned out. The girl, who was only 3 years old now, had no idea about the terrible trouble that had threatened her several years ago. Perhaps someday her parents would tell her this story, but now Annie was basking in love, care, and absolute happiness, enjoying every day of her serene childhood amidst beautiful nature. Eleanor was always by her side, her guardian angel, as the girl's mother and father believed. They were sure that this woman had played a huge, decisive role in their daughter's destiny. Eleanor, looking at the happy child, simply felt deep joy and gratitude for the opportunity to be a part of her life. Eleanor had never been a beauty, not in childhood, not in youth, not in her mature years. Once this caused her unbearable suffering. For hours, she studied her plain reflection in the mirror. A shapeless nose, small, indefinable gray eyes, thin lips, and fleshy cheeks. Not ugly, of course, but she could by no means be called cute or pretty. And her figure matched her face: short stature, full hips, almost complete lack of a waist. She wasn't fat or awkward, just completely ordinary, without a single highlight that could catch the eye. Nature seemed to have been stingy with colors, bestowing upon Eleanor medium brown hair, pale eyelashes, and pale skin. Even cosmetics, on which she spent a lot of time, couldn't make her appearance in any way remarkable. Quite another matter was her friend Alice, a big-eyed beauty with a thick braid down to her waist, or her classmate Vera, slim, tall, and striking. Boys swarmed around them. They were always the center of attention, and it seemed that with such looks, all doors were open to them. Unlike the invisible Eleanor, who felt gray and unnoticed. Ellie didn't shine in her studies either. Her academic abilities were quite average. Higher, of course, than Alice's, but Alice didn't need to strain to be everyone's favorite with those big eyes and dazzling smile. Ellie, on the other hand, considered herself utterly mediocre, and this greatly depressed her. Her parents didn't understand or share her feelings. Healthy, arms and legs intact, eyes see, ears hear, her mother listed, looking at her despondent daughter. Look how many disabled people and people with real defects there are, and don't anger God. And anyway, calm down, her father echoed. You know you can't drink water from a face, but a C in algebra is bad. Worry about that. Old-fashioned parents considered fussing about appearance silly and whimsical, advising Ellie to focus on her studies. The girl tried, deciding that since she wasn't good-looking, she would become an outstanding specialist. But no matter how much she pored over textbooks, no matter how much she sat over notebooks, nothing worked out. Formulas remained an incomprehensible script. Dates got mixed up. Russian language rules seemed like a set of meaningless words. Ellie also had no talents, neither singing, nor playing, nor excelling in sports. She joined various clubs, trying to find her calling, but nothing came easier to her than to others. In her teens, she seriously cried from the feeling of her own grayness and mediocrity. She tried so hard, but nothing worked out, and her parents, instead of support, sometimes even scolded her for her despondency, which they considered a manifestation of pride. "Not everyone can be beauties and talents," her mother snapped. "But you are healthy and strong. The country relies on such people, not on those big-eyed dragonflies." These words only deepened Ellie's pain, for she wanted more than anything in the world to be exactly like that, a big-eyed dragonfly. Boys paid her no attention, which seemed quite natural to her. Why would they want her? Not bright like Alice, not smart like the excellent student Kate, who was respected for helping with homework. It was especially hard to see Alex, a classmate whose sight made Ellie's heart pound wildly, gazing at other girls, walking past her as if she were empty space. Sometimes she was angry at fate and her parents for her plain jeans, dreaming of plastic surgery. But more often she just sighed, looking at her beautiful classmates, and thought about the unfairness of life. The only thing Ellie liked from about the age of 10 was interacting with young children. Sweet, funny, trusting little ones always lifted her spirits. They were so easy to surprise and delight, and they paid no attention to her appearance or school achievements. Children felt they were welcome and reciprocated with happy smiles, cheerful laughter, and sincere love. Mothers in the yard were happy when Ellie came out of the building, as the little ones immediately rushed to her. She knew how to organize fun games, knew how to please them, and for a long time became the center of their small universe. Children cried when their parents tried to take them home in the middle of a game. "You have a talent," a young mother once said, whose capricious son turned into a clever and compliant child next to Ellie. Talent? Ellie thought she had misheard. Her? No, it couldn't be. What was so special about messing around with little ones? "Perhaps you could become a good caregiver," the mother added thoughtfully, while her son clung trustingly to Ellie's hand. Then, at 14, the girl first thought about choosing a profession. Maybe, indeed, become a caregiver. She liked interacting with children, and she was good at it. Ellie didn't consider 10th grade, realizing that studying wasn't her path, and she needed to decide by the end of middle school. Her parents supported her decision to go to college after 9th grade. "Right," her father praised. "No point wasting time in school, you'll have a profession in your hands." "We are not capable of sciences," her mother sighed. "You can't jump higher than your head. None of us have higher education, and it seems you won't either." Ellie knew her mother had hoped for something else, dreamed that her daughter would make something of herself, maybe even become a boss. Ellie's school performance brought her ambitious parent back down to earth, and she didn't hide her disappointment, causing her daughter pain. But when Ellie said she wanted to become a caregiver, her parents expressed dissatisfaction. "What kind of profession is that?" her father fumed. "Wiping snot off other people's children for pennies. Nonsense." "Agreed," her mother supported. "Salaries are meager, responsibility is huge, parents won't give you peace." So Ellie went to study to be a sewing machine operator, a profession that, in her parents' opinion, was supposed to bring her happiness. Always with money, always needed by people. Her mother ticked off the advantages of a seamstress's job. You can take on extra work, sew for your own family, saving money. Studying was hard for Ellie. Her classmates' work flew, but hers resulted in crooked seams and uneven patterns. Later, of course, thanks to perseverance, she learned, but remained at an average level. But her parents were satisfied. Ellie no longer fussed with little ones. She had grown up, and her studies took up time. But when she had the chance to interact with friends' children, she blossomed. "Oh, father, we'll have many grandchildren with you." Her mother smiled, seeing her interest. "I'm not against it." Her father nodded. "As long as a decent son-in-law comes along, one who can provide for a crowd." But her parents' dreams were not destined to come true. Ellie herself dreamed of children from the age of 14, unable to imagine life without the ringing laughter and the patter of little feet. But no admirers flocked around her, and she realized this fact early on. However, the time came, and young men began to pay attention to her. Of course, they weren't handsome and popular like her former classmate Alex, but the girl was happy nonetheless. It turned out it was so nice to feel that a guy was interested in you. Such a guy was Steve, who lived in the neighboring yard, known since childhood, just as gray and unremarkable. He had studied at a construction college, got a job at a factory, and inherited a small studio apartment from his grandmother. Under pressure from relatives, he decided it was time to get married and start a family. His gaze fell upon Ellie. She was from a decent family, modest, hardworking, domestic, without pretensions. Perhaps Steve dreamed of bright stars, but he realistically assessed his chances. With Ellie, a calm, quiet life awaited him, one that didn't require constant effort on his part. One day, Stephen met Ellie at the bus stop when she was returning from the sewing factory where she had recently started working. "Hi," he smiled, so easily and naturally, as if they were close friends. Surprised, Ellie greeted him back. Steve said he had been waiting for her for half an hour, and at this news, Ellie's heart pounded. Had a guy finally paid attention to her and even made an effort? Of course, she allowed him to walk her home. Stephen walked beside her, talked about his life, asked Ellie questions, and then took her hand. A gentle gesture that said a lot. He walked her to her building entrance and, a little shyly, suggested, "Are you free tomorrow? There's a new movie with Jim Carrey. Maybe we could go?" "I love that actor." Ellie smiled broadly. "Of course, we'll go." That evening, she couldn't fall asleep for a long time, recalling the walk. He had looked at her like no one before, with interest, attentively, even with admiration. As if he didn't notice her grayness, he saw someone else. It was incredibly pleasant. Ellie felt pretty, attractive, worthy of love and interest for the first time. Almost like Alice. Stephen himself didn't evoke romantic feelings in her, but today he appeared in a different light. It turned out he could be decisive and gentle. She sensed strength and reliability in him. When had he grown up and become a real man? The next day, in the dark cinema hall, Stephen, summoning his courage, kissed Ellie. Her head spun, her ears buzzed. It was so unexpected and pleasant. Her first kiss. It happened, and she finally felt feminine. "I like you very much," Stephen said softly. "Let's go out." "Let's!" Ellie immediately agreed, feeling her cheeks burn. They officially became a couple, and Ellie's life changed. There were dates, flowers, trips to the cinema and cafes, Stephen's friends' birthdays, kisses, walks under the moon. All this lifted her spirits, made her feel special, filled her with energy. Ellie tried not to notice that Stephen wasn't the hero of her novel, although perhaps she was a little in love out of gratitude for him showing her what it was like to be special and attractive. And she finally calmed down. She had wanted to become a wife and mother from a very young age. In those years when others dreamed of a career or a car, Ellie imagined herself a mother of many children. As she grew older, she became anxious. So gray, so unremarkable, so many beauties around. What if no one wanted to marry her? What if she remained alone? And then Stephen appeared, attentive, caring, seemingly in love. The fear of loneliness vanished, and her dreams gained a chance to become reality. About a year later, Stephen proposed. They were walking along the embankment, discussing a movie. Unexpectedly, he blurted out, "Ellie, let's make it official. I have a place to live, my apartment. I'm tired of being alone." Not the most romantic proposal, but Ellie happily agreed. It wasn't a complete surprise. Everything was leading up to it. They had a modest wedding. Ellie's mother wiped away tears. Her mother-in-law smiled stiffly. The fathers were engrossed in conversation. The toastmaster, tipsy relatives, silly contests. Everything went as it should. Eleanor wished for this burdensome day to end quickly. At home in Stephen's apartment, she gratefully pulled off the Pishna prickly dress and let down her hair. The tired groom was already snoring loudly by then. Their family life began, a typical average routine. Both worked, came home. He lay on the sofa in front of the TV. She went to cook dinner. Stephen, having become a legal husband, considered his mission accomplished. There were no more invitations to the cinema. Compliments were reserved only for her culinary talents. Eleanor was basically fine with this. Home life was like many others. Ordinary family life. No better, no worse. At least she had a husband, not an old maid. And soon, she hoped, children would arrive, and her cherished dream would come true. But nothing worked out with the children. A year passed after the wedding, then 2, 3. Parents on both sides hinted that they wanted to become grandparents. Ellie dreamed of it more than anyone, but nothing came of it. Stephen didn't suffer from the lack of heirs. His life was already quite good. His wife took care of him, fed him, washed his clothes, cleaned. With children, she wouldn't have time for this. He didn't exert himself. "It's okay. People live without children," he reassured his wife. In response to these words, Eleanor wanted to hit him with something heavy. She had only married him to become a mother. Her mother-in-law signed Ellie up for an examination, shaking her head. "Something must be wrong with you." It was hurtful to hear such things. It seemed Stephen's relatives considered her defective. Her own parents behaved no better. "Ah, it seems Grandma's genes were passed down," her mother lamented. "Your father has a barren aunt. You must take after her." Ellie had the examination, and it turned out she was perfectly fine. "Perhaps the reason is with your husband," the doctor shrugged. "Or incompatibility. In any case, your husband needs to be examined." But Stephen flatly refused. "What nonsense! What do I have to do with it?" he fumed. "There have never been problems with men in our family. I'm not going." Ellie begged, persuaded, even cried. It was useless. Stephen considered going to the clinic a humiliation, and his family supported him. She probably messed around in her youth, didn't take care of herself, and now she's trying to blame us, her mother-in-law said maliciously. It was so painful and offensive that Ellie couldn't find words to reply. Her relationship with Stephen grew colder. In essence, there was none. They lived like neighbors. Therefore, Eleanor was almost not surprised, and certainly not upset by the news of another woman. He confessed himself directly, without beating around the bush. "Ellie, you need to move out. You have a week. We're getting divorced." "What?" She didn't understand. "That's right. There's another woman, from work, from university. She's pregnant with my child. We're getting divorced." "Well, that's news!" Eleanor gasped. "That's the news," Stephen agreed. "See, I'm normal, and you were dragging me to the hospital. It's you who can't have children. Everything's fine with me. We're expecting twins." "But you said you didn't want children," Ellie clarified. "Didn't want them then, want them now," her almost ex-husband retorted. "A person needs heirs, offspring." Eleanor returned to the home of her aging parents. Where else? The foolish marriage lasted almost 10 years, a long time by local standards. Many of her friends had divorced earlier, but almost all had managed to become mothers. Ellie envied them. Yes, raising children alone is hard, but it's better than living without your own little ones. Eleanor still had hope. She was barely 35, an age that allowed her to become a mother. But water doesn't flow under a lying stone. She had to do something. At the very least, she needed a man, because a child should have a father. But that didn't work out. Eleanor again felt like a gray mediocrity, a shadow, invisible to the opposite sex. By 35, she had gained weight. Her hair had thinned, wrinkles had appeared. She still hadn't learned to dress stylishly. Nothing fit her awkward figure well. The charm of youth was gone. Sadly. But there were still a few romances that didn't end in anything serious. She celebrated her 45th birthday alone. It was a Monday. Her parents were gone by then. First her father from a heart attack. 2 years later, her mother from the same. It was hard for Eleanor to endure the losses alone. She had friends, but they all had families, children. They couldn't devote all their time to her. And she didn't demand it. She understood everything. On her 45th birthday, on her way home from work, she bought an expensive cake and candles. She sat in the dimly lit kitchen, looking at the flames, and thought about her failed life. The best years were behind her. Her dream hadn't come true. No children, no husband, no close person. On the other hand, she was relatively healthy, still young, had a home and a job that brought income. Maybe there was nothing to complain about. But why then was she so sad, so gloomy at heart? She didn't want to sit alone in the kitchen on such a day. She decided to go to the mall, wander through the shops, sit in a cafe, cheer herself up. It was impossible to feel lonely in a crowd. It was bright, noisy, cheerful, beautiful. The city was already decorated for the new year. Eleanor quickly got ready and called a taxi. If she was going out, she was going out. 10 minutes later, she was at the mall. Music was blaring, people were choosing gifts, many with children. Eleanor admired the families. Happy, not realizing their happiness. Here a young mother irritably scolds her 3-year-old son for whining. The little one is simply tired. How can she not understand? Here young parents scold their 6-year-old daughter, sobbing over a doll. Oh, if only Eleanor had a child, she would never scold them. Everything can be explained calmly. It just requires patience and attention. Eleanor went to the clothing department. Maybe she'd find something interesting for the corporate party. But she only got upset. No matter what she put on, it didn't look the way she wanted. She left without making any purchases. But she left a considerable sum at the confectionery, unable to resist her favorite eclairs and pastries, although a cake was waiting at home. Yes, Ellie had a sweet tooth. She had to get pleasure from something. She knew about the harm, but couldn't help it. A colleague once remarked that Ellie ate away her stress. Perhaps it was true. Her whole life was a kind of stress. She couldn't come to terms with loneliness and unsettledness. Panic gripped her at the thought of old age in an empty, cold house. That time was not far off. Ellie sighed, chasing away the thoughts. She glanced at the clock. It was late. The center was closing. Time to go back. She had to get up early tomorrow. She went out onto the porch, scanned the parking lot. Where was a free taxi? She didn't want to trudge to the bus stop in such darkness and bad weather. The frost was getting stronger. The sky was clear. The stars were shining. It would be cold tomorrow. She needed to hang a bird feeder. It was hard for those who lived outside. Okay, birds. Animals were used to it. but people. Many homeless people. Ellie often saw them near the garbage bins. Those were the ones who had it hard. Those were the ones who should grieve. Not her, who had a warm, cozy home. Ellie spotted a taxi and hurried towards it so no one would intercept it. That's when she saw her. A thin girl in a light jacket, clearly not for the season, stretched over a huge belly. The girl stood by the fire exit, trying to warm up. She was stomping her feet, rubbing her palms, shrugging her shoulders. She was clearly frozen in her spring jacket. Judging by her belly, she would be going to the maternity hospital soon. What was she doing outside in such a state? Ellie became curious. She forgot about the taxi, approached closer, and was stunned with horror when she saw her shoes. Light, dirty, worn-out sneakers. Her feet must have been completely frozen. The girl looked lost and frightened. Despair was readable in her beautiful dark eyes that took up half her face. "What's wrong?" Eleanor couldn't help but ask, her heart aching with pity. "Just cold," she replied. "So why don't you go inside? The mall is closing." "They kicked me out." The stranger lowered her eyes. "I'll wait until the guard turns away and slip back in. I'll hide somewhere and spend the night." "Are you homeless?" "No, I have a home, but I can't go there." "What happened?" Eleanor realized she couldn't remain indifferent. She had to help this young creature. It was impossible to walk past. "It's a long story." The girl waved her hand, keeping her eyes on the guard. He was watching the entrance carefully. Soon the last visitors would leave, and the door would be locked. The girl would be left outside. She definitely wouldn't survive the December frosty night. "Come to my place," Eleanor blurted out unexpectedly and immediately got scared. Invite a stranger home? But looking at the chilled pregnant woman, she understood. It was the only right decision. The girl needed to be warmed up urgently. The stranger looked at her distrustfully. "Are you serious?" "Yes, of course," Eleanor stated confidently now. "I'll just call a taxi." "Thank you so much." The girl couldn't believe her luck. "I'm embarrassed to bother you, but there's no other way. Thank you so much." "You won't bother me. I live alone anyway." Eleanor smiled, dialing the taxi number. Both were silent on the way. A tense silence hung in the car. At home, in the warm kitchen, with the cake on the table, everything became simpler. "Is it your birthday?" The girl smiled. How sweet she was. Fragile, big-eyed, graceful, young. Eleanor even doubted if she was 18. How did such a defenseless creature end up on the street on a frosty night? Where were her parents? Her husband? The child's father? How could they allow her to be left outside the mall doors? "My name is Clara," the girl introduced herself, looking around. "Your place is very cozy." "And I'm Eleanor. I'll put on some tea and you'll tell me everything that happened and we'll figure out together how to help, okay?" "Thank you so much." Clara was touched. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Stay for now." Eleanor smiled. "Come, I'll show you the room where you'll sleep." She took her guest to her parents' bedroom. Almost nothing had changed since they were gone. A large bed, a bookshelf, a spacious wardrobe. "Clara, it should be comfortable here." "It's a wonderful room!" The girl was delighted. Eleanor returned to the kitchen to fuss. 5 minutes later, Clara came in, sat at the table, propping her chin. "Perhaps it's time to tell my story. You have the right to know. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened. I wouldn't have survived the night outside." "Yes, the frost is strong today." Eleanor shook her head. "Tell me what happened, and we'll figure something out." "That's unlikely." Clara sighed sadly and began her story. She was born in a small town, was the eldest in a large family. looked after her younger siblings from an early age. Her parents were simple, strict, and honored traditions. Children had to obey implicitly, without their own opinion. But I was always different, Clara sighed. I felt like I was in prison. I wanted bright clothes, loud music, to go to discos. My father forbade it, saying no one would marry a girl like that. As if I needed that. I wanted to study, to become a designer. Her parents had other plans. What designer? She drew well, but you couldn't make money from it. They sent her to a culinary college to get a secure profession. Eleanor sighed. Clara's story echoed her own. Ellie also wasn't allowed to fulfill her dream of becoming a caregiver. She had to work as a cutter. Back then, she didn't dare disobey her parents, thinking they knew best. Clara was the same. When I turned 18, my father married me off. Clara's eyes filled with sadness. She lowered her head. She couldn't refuse. It was decided. She became the wife of 40-year-old widower Frederick, a former colleague of her father's. Frederick had once saved her father's life, and he felt indebted. He often looked at me when he came to visit, Clara recalled. His gaze was attentive and unpleasant, somehow sticky. It gave me goosebumps, but I couldn't have imagined he would become my husband. That's almost a crime, Eleanor gasped. You're 18. He's 40. You're a child. He's a grown man. How did your parents agree? They were even happy. Clara smiled bitterly. We have a poor town. Half the people drink, half work for pennies. And Frederick is a former military man. A big house, an expensive car, a security business. An enviable groom by local standards. Only he always scared me. His gaze was like a reptile's. He seemed to smile, kind, brought gifts. But I was afraid of him. The news of the marriage was shocking. I begged my father, my mother, but they were adamant. It had to be done, and that was that. I resigned myself. What else was there? And I was in love with my classmate Max back then. And even now, honestly. It's hard for me to believe. Eleanor shook her head. In our day, in the 21st century, parents marry off their daughter against her will to a grown man. It immediately reminds me of the painting, Unequal Marriage. Do you know it? I know. Clara nodded. That's just how it is with us, Clara continued. What could I do? My opinion didn't matter to anyone. There was no wedding. We sat in a restaurant, parents, groom, bride, and then I had to go to my husband's house, and family life began. It was hard for the girl to part with her childhood and become Frederick's domestic slave. He liked order, and she was supposed to maintain it. Dust or a dirty plate resulted in punishment. First, an hour-long sermon. A woman must obey her husband. A mess in the house is a mess in the head. The worst part began afterwards. The man would lock Clara in the attic for the night. It was cold, dark, and scary there. I'm still afraid of the dark, Clara admitted shyly. There was no bed or mattress in the attic. She had to sleep on the cold floor. In the morning, Frederick would let the guilty one out and act as if nothing had happened. Clara also wasn't allowed to show her feelings, otherwise it would be punishment again. For minor offenses, a few hours. For serious ones, days. Of course, Clara was afraid of him. He had scared her before, even more so now. She tried to obey, but she didn't always guess his desires. Sometimes it seemed he was deliberately looking for a reason to find fault. Occasionally, Frederick would get drunk, alone or with friends. Then he would lose his mind. He would see things that weren't there, shout, threaten violence, throw everything he could get his hands on. Clara would hide in the attic or run out into the yard. Frederick would rage for a few hours, then fall asleep. Clara would crawl out and start cleaning up, because in the morning he would be furious if he saw a mess. She really didn't want to see him in that state. "Why didn't you tell your parents?" Eleanor gasped. "Frederick is probably not normal. It's dangerous to be with him. He needs treatment." "Parents?" Clara smiled bitterly. "Who would listen to me? Frederick is one of the richest and most respected people in town. And my parents always considered me capricious, arrogant. It's useless to talk to them. They would just say again that I think too much of myself." "Well, what if you had called doctors when he had an episode?" "The doctors might have taken him until morning, but then he would have come back very angry for me turning him in. I can't even imagine what he would have done to me then. I still don't know exactly what happened to his wife. Nobody knows." "You said he was a widower?" "Yes, that wife, the first one, was also about 15 years younger. Not from our town, he brought her from somewhere. No friends, no relatives. Quiet, silent, withdrawn. Now I understand why. I didn't know her very well. Saw her sometimes in the store or on the street. And she didn't interest me much. I was a child. Kind of strange. Oh well." One day, returning from school, Clara saw a crowd near Frederick's house. She turned onto the next street, wanting to walk past and find out what was going on. It turned out to be a funeral. Among the crowd, she noticed her father and mother. She ran up and asked, "What happened?" "Frederick's wife died," her mother replied sadly. "How? Why? What happened?" Clara couldn't comprehend it. She had seen her recently, pale, anxious, but young, healthy. What could have happened? "It's none of your business," her father said, nudging her. "Go home. Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong." That night, Clara overheard her parents talking in the kitchen. "And yet I don't understand." Her mother's voice sounded anxious. "How could she fall from the second floor? You'd have to try. The railings are high." Frederick explained. "She got drunk. And drunk people do all sorts of things. Laura doesn't seem like an alcoholic. Seems like it, doesn't seem like it. Are you an expert?" Her father was irritated. "The police investigated. It was an accident." "But I don't think so. Either Frederick pushed her, or she did it herself because of such a life. And it's not just me. Neighbors heard arguing and shouting before. When you think something, you should cross yourself." Her father almost shouted. "Don't talk nonsense. The housewives are clucking, and you're picking it up. Specialists conducted the investigation. It was an accident. Period." Rumors circulated in the town for a long time. Many didn't believe it was an accident. But time passed. The story lost its edge. Since then, Clara was even more afraid of her father's friend. The news of the marriage was shocking, but she understood. There was nowhere to go. You couldn't go against your parents' will. "How could that be?" Eleanor threw up her hands. "I don't understand your parents. If they knew what kind of person he was, if they considered the possibility that he did something to his wife, how could they give you to him?" "As I said, he's an enviable groom," Clara said. "Becoming related to someone like that is a winning ticket. All doors are open to my family now. As for me, my parents have other daughters and a son." There was so much bitterness in these words that Eleanor hugged the fragile girl. Clara relaxed, softened, as if she had been waiting for this. Then she pulled away and continued. "About 6 months after the wedding, I realized I was expecting a child. I was scared. I didn't want it. Frederick dreamed of an heir, but I didn't want a child from that terrible man. Another prisoner would appear in our house prison. It's one thing for me, I'm an adult. But a defenseless baby in the hands of a monster. Imagine what he could do. Clara hid her condition, but the perceptive Frederick noticed the changes. I guessed, he said happily. Clara sighed. He took her to the jewelry store to choose whatever she wanted. He hadn't been stingy before, but now he showered her with gifts, stuffed her with fruit. He even took her himself to an expensive medical center where I registered. But the gifts and care didn't bring joy. On the contrary, it was scary, disgusting. Frederick hugged her in public, said he was happy, confessed his love. But Clara remembered how he locked her in the attic, humiliated her. He didn't raise a hand, but she felt he was holding back. Clara understood that someday he would snap. She knew it, she was sure. And who knew, maybe the fate of the first wife awaited her. Everyone would say she fell down the stairs. Time passed, her belly grew. She knew she was carrying a girl. Frederick hoped for a son. The news of a daughter was disappointing. But Clara was happy. What if a son turned out to be like his father? How could she love him then? And a girl would most likely be like her mother. Frederick restrained himself, scolded her for missteps, but didn't lock her in the attic. He said that after she gave birth, she would get what she deserved. But for now, she needed to be taken care of. These words scared Clara. I probably resigned myself, the girl admitted. I adapted. I understood that if I played by Frederick's rules, I could live. Many husbands beat their wives in our town. It's almost normal. But Frederick never hit me once. And I had everything I wanted, if I just asked. The other thing was that in such conditions, she didn't want anything. Clara resigned herself to fate, prepared to become a mother, tried to be a good wife. It seemed her whole life was predetermined. Only once did she accidentally overhear her husband talking to his mistress. That Frederick had affairs wasn't news. He didn't hide it, came home in the early morning, smelling of perfume, and crashed into bed. It didn't occur to Clara to make remarks or ask questions. All the better, less attention on her. What jealousy? Let him do what he wants. This happened at night. Clara's stomach hurt. She couldn't sleep. She stroked her belly, trying to relieve the spasm. Frederick was in his study, working. Clara never delved into his affairs. And then a phone call. The girl became all ears. 2 a.m, calls don't just happen. Her husband's voice sounded soft, tender. Clara had never heard it before. He called the interlocutor, "My beloved, beautiful Anna." It was so unusual that Clara forgot about the pain. Imagine, Frederick could be like that. "I miss you very much," he confessed. The interlocutor, "Of course, I miss you too, but I have a lot of work, and I need to keep an eye on my wife. The girl is stupid, naive, carrying my child. She might harm it. Yes, it's unfair, but that's how it turned out." Clara was angered that he spoke of her like that. "Yes, as soon as she gives birth, we'll be together. We'll take the child from her. She can go anywhere." "Yes, I promise." Fear overwhelmed Clara. Did she imagine it, or was Frederick planning something terrible? She only heard his replies, but much was clear from them. "It's a shame you can't have children. A child is a priceless gift. But you'll be a wonderful mother to my girl. Better than young Clara, who doesn't understand anything." A problem? What problems could there be with her? I have connections everywhere. Everything will go smoothly. Clara can have more children. She's young, healthy. What difference does it make to her? Clara's mind raced. The puzzle pieces fit together. The picture wasn't a happy one. Frederick had a mistress, Anna, for whom he had strong feelings. Why didn't he marry her then? Why marry a naive girl? Apparently, Anna couldn't have children, and the couple needed an heir. Frederick married young Clara to use her as an incubator, then discard her. He was the local king. He could do what he wanted. He would push her out to her parents, and they would even blame her for not being a good wife. And her child, her little daughter, would be raised by a stranger. Anna. The little one stirred in her belly. Tenderness flooded her heart. No, she wouldn't give this child to anyone. Clara already loved the little one. But Frederick, strong, influential, he had everything covered. Clara wouldn't dare make a sound. She would be accused of failing her duties. A diagnosis would be found. Something would be planted. Nothing could be ruled out. He had long arms. Since there was nowhere to go in the town, only one option remained: to run away as far as possible. But where? Where and how to live? How to explain her disappearance? She was due to give birth in a couple of months. She needed to settle down. Wandering alone was one thing, with a baby in her arms was another. But staying with Frederick was dangerous. While she was carrying the child, maybe he wouldn't touch her. But afterwards, when he wanted to take the baby, and Clara started resisting, she wasn't going to find out. The next morning, Clara gathered the jewelry her husband had given her and took it to a pawn shop. The money would be enough for a few months in a strange city, but then she would need income. With a baby in her arms, she could hardly work. She decided to solve problems as they arose. While she had money, she would see what happened next. She packed her belongings in a bag, adding clothes for her daughter. She didn't want anything belonging to the child to remain in that house. She dressed inappropriately for the weather. She left her winter clothes behind. Otherwise, Frederick, upon returning, would notice their absence and start investigating. This gave her extra time, perhaps crucial hours. She put on her autumn jacket and sneakers. Deciding it was fine, she would take a taxi. Frederick had left on business. He was often not home. Clara took advantage of his absence, called a taxi, and went to the bus station. She got on the first bus available, which brought her to Eleanor's city. Fate. At the station, I realized I had been robbed, Clara continued. Most likely when I was getting on the bus. There was a crowd near the entrance. A crush occurred. That's when someone took my wallet from my bag. And Clara was left with nothing. Without money, without support, in a strange city. Dressed inappropriately for a frosty December. A desperate situation. I went to the nearest mall, Clara said. At least it was warm there. I had some change left in my pocket, enough for lunch. But I had no idea what to do next. I knew one thing. I couldn't go home. Frederick had already noticed my absence and was furious. I didn't even want to think about what he might do. So you just arrived today? Eleanor clarified. Yes, this afternoon. I was incredibly lucky that you took me in. Let's use you informally. Eleanor smiled. It's more natural for me. Okay, Clara agreed shyly. He will look for you, of course, but I don't think Frederick will immediately realize I'm not in town. Now he'll start shaking down all my relatives and friends. By the time he figures it out, enough time will have passed, and I'll go somewhere he won't find a trace. Honestly, I don't know how... Listen, what if he goes to the police? They'll issue a search warrant. They'll find you quickly. He won't. I left a note asking him not to look for me. And the same under my parents' door. I explained that I left on my own. But he will, of course. He will look. He doesn't need me. But the child... Clara gently stroked her belly. Eleanor, despite the tension, smiled. This girl would be a good mother. But what to do with Clara? How to help? Here's what, Eleanor said. Stay with me for now. If anyone asks, I'll say you're a distant relative from the village. It's unlikely anyone will be curious. We don't socialize with the neighbors. Live here and don't worry about anything. Until summer at least, and then we'll see." "Really?" Clara's face lit up with a smile. She became even more charming. Her eyes sparkled. Dimples appeared. "Of course," Eleanor nodded. "Where can you go in your condition? To the police, as I understand it, is impossible. There's no crime. You have to hide. Frederick won't think of looking for you at a complete stranger's house." I don't know what to say. Words aren't enough to express my gratitude. If it weren't for you, my child and I probably wouldn't be here. We would have frozen by a fence. "Everything will be fine," Eleanor smiled. It was nice to feel like a savior. Now she wasn't alone. There was a person in the house who needed her attention and care. And soon a little one would be born. This was real happiness. Days flowed by. Eleanor went to the factory. Clara stayed home. She wasn't idle. She cleaned, cooked, sewed diapers on Eleanor's sewing machine. Eleanor herself returned home in a different mood. She bought something tasty for Clara. The girl needed positive emotions after what she had been through. The refrigerator always had vegetables and fruits now. Pregnant women needed vitamins. In the evenings, they watched TV or talked. The young girl turned out to be a pleasant conversationalist with a wonderful, easygoing nature. She told Eleanor everything that was on her mind, shared her secrets. "I've never even been this open with my mother," Clara admitted. "But you understand and support me." Eleanor was pleased by these words. She felt almost like this girl's mother. By age, she could well have been her daughter. And she sincerely didn't understand how Clara's parents could do that. Why did she have to seek refuge with a stranger instead of her family? Did her mother and father really not understand what happiness it was to have such a sweet daughter? One day, Clara told her about Max, the classmate she had a romance with. "He's wonderful, very good. He courted me so beautifully." Her eyes shone with joy at the mention of his name. It was clear that her feelings remained. "Can you imagine, Max, for my sake, back in school, went to work part-time at a car repair shop to earn money for movies, cafes, flowers? He was ready for anything." Clara also loved the handsome classmate. They made plans. Then Max went into the army, and when he returned, Clara was married. Max was upset, angry. Then he understood. He came to Clara when Frederick wasn't there, urging her to run away. "I wanted to do it so badly," Clara recalled. To run away with Max far, far away. But then I realized I couldn't. Frederick would definitely find us. Max wouldn't be able to get a job officially because he would immediately be found out. Frederick has connections everywhere. I don't know what he would have done to him, to us. I didn't want to ruin Max's life. He didn't deserve it. I had to refuse. What a sad and romantic story, Eleanor sighed. Such things happen not only in movies. So, what about Max? Max. He was offended, decided that I preferred an old, rich husband and a comfortable life, that I betrayed our feelings. It was painful, hurtful, but I didn't try to convince him otherwise. It's even better for him to think that way. Otherwise, he would have tried to save me. And that would have ended badly for him. A month flew by unnoticed. The due date was approaching. Everything in Eleanor's house was ready for the baby's arrival. She was eagerly awaiting this moment. Could a child really appear here? Incredible. They decided to convert her father's study into a nursery. They put in a crib, bought for pennies. Eleanor sewed the bedding herself from soft pink fabric, made a canopy. It turned out to be a beautiful crib for a princess. The woman often admired it. imagining Clara putting the tiny girl there. Clara couldn't give birth in the hospital. Frederick had surely given a description. As soon as she appeared in a maternity hospital, he would know. Eleanor arranged with an experienced midwife to come when called. The pregnancy went well. Home births had become popular. So there was nothing unusual about giving birth without a maternity hospital. Clara was immensely grateful to Eleanor for her care. She assured her that as soon as she could, she would definitely repay her. Eleanor just smiled. Clara didn't realize she was already doing a lot, trusting her, brightening her loneliness. Next to Clara, Eleanor felt needed, useful, strong. One day, Eleanor returned from work early. The electricity was out at the factory. On the way, she bought groceries, including Clara's favorite cottage cheese. Let her be happy. She opened the door with her key and quietly entered the hallway. What if Clara was sleeping? It had been happening often lately. Her body was gathering strength before labor. The house was silent. And then, from behind the closed bedroom door, Clara's voice was heard. She was on the phone. Her voice sounded harsh, firm, commanding. She had never spoken like that. Eleanor involuntarily froze, listening intently. "You want your child? Prepare the money," Clara instructed the interlocutor. "What you paid is not enough. If the required amount isn't here in 3 days, I'll fall from a windowsill somewhere onto a railing. And that's it. You won't prove anything. I just slipped accidentally. My belly pulled me over." Eleanor shrank by the door. What was happening? Was this really the sweet, quiet Clara? Who was she demanding money from? From Frederick? But it was his child. And Clara was afraid of her husband. She would hardly dare to call him. What then? "You think faster," Clara continued. "If you throw another hand out hoping to stall until the birth, then I will give birth. What else is there to do? But I'll leave the child at an orphanage. You won't know which city. Can you imagine how many foundlings there are every day? You'll be exhausted looking. And there's little time. Healthy newborns are adopted quickly." The image of this new Clara didn't fit with the modest girl. This Clara behaved harshly, defiantly. She manipulated skillfully, dictated terms, threatened. Clara hung up and dialed another number. Her voice sounded friendly, gentle. Eleanor caught every word. She had to understand who she had sheltered. "Yes, Max, I called them. No, I'm sure. Yes, you're right. I know how to talk to them. That's exactly how I talked. If they want to see their daughter alive, they'll bring the money to the agreed place. And you keep an eye on the place, okay? Carefully and cautiously, they might involve the police. Although probably not, after I scared them like that. Yes, I'm doing well. No, this simpleton has no idea. It's easy with her. She takes care of me, feeds me goodies, can you imagine? You were right. She's a fool. I feel good. Yes, Eleanor tiptoed to the front door. The conversation was coming to an end. The woman didn't want Clara to guess she had been eavesdropping. She was afraid of her reaction, and she didn't understand what to do. She went out into the yard, heading towards the gazebo. This was where the family spent evenings. Her mother brewed tea, her father grilled kebabs. It was nice. And now Eleanor sat here, trying to comprehend what she had heard. Clara was not who she pretended to be. Not a downtrodden victim. She was demanding money. How skillfully she told stories. A talented actress. Eleanor had opened her heart to her. Ah, what a simpleton. And Clara had an accomplice, Max. So, Max existed. Perhaps that was the only truth, and the rest was questionable. Why was she willing to sacrifice the child? Maybe she was lying? Why was someone willing to pay? Maybe Frederick wasn't a tyrant, but a victim. Eleanor knew one thing. She couldn't let Clara know she was aware. This girl was a monster in sheep's clothing. It was easy to believe her. Defenseless, fragile, young, pregnant. But Eleanor couldn't stay overnight in the same house with her. On the spot, she concocted a story about a business trip from the factory. It had never happened before, but how would Clara know? She had only been living there for a little over a month. Eleanor dialed her friend's number and asked if she could stay over. She said she had been fumigating for cockroaches. One problem solved. All that remained was to inform Clara in a way that she would believe. A business trip? Great! Clara smiled. Must be interesting. When I put my daughter in kindergarten, I'll get a job too. Can't wait. You'll have time. Eleanor smiled, trying to seem natural. By evening, Eleanor had made up her mind. First thing, the police. A colleague's eldest son, Owen, worked there. She had known him since childhood. He wouldn't refuse. After saying goodbye to Clara, they even hugged. Eleanor went to the police station. She called Owen and explained she had something important. He met her on the porch. "Hello, Aunt Ellie." Owen was happy. "Come in, I'll show you my office." Eleanor smiled. This young man called her aunt. Yes, she was already an adult. How hard it was to get used to. In the office, on a hard chair, Eleanor told him everything. Owen listened attentively. In his uniform and with a serious face, he looked unusually grown up. Having finished, Eleanor took out her phone and showed him a photo of Clara. "Her face looks familiar," Owen said thoughtfully. "I'll send the photo and run it through the database. I'll contact you, okay?" "Okay, thank you." "You're welcome." With a sense of duty fulfilled, Eleanor went to her friend's place. She had done everything she could. Now, whatever happened, happened. 2 days of the business trip. Maybe something would be found out. It turned out sooner. Owen called the next day after lunch. "Well, Aunt Ellie, we got your..." Eleanor couldn't believe it. "Clara, you mean?" "She's not Clara, she's Diana. Come after work, I'll tell you everything. Thanks to you, I have a big case. Thank you." "You're welcome," Eleanor replied automatically and hung up. She couldn't wait until the end of the day and asked her boss for time off. She didn't do that very often. She called a taxi to find out the truth sooner. Owen met her on the porch again. His eyes were shining. A smile didn't leave his face. Eleanor was in his office again. He didn't delay and immediately began to tell the story. As he spoke, Eleanor's eyes widened. She expected anything but this. Clara turned out to be Diana. She really was born in a small town, in a large family, and dreamed of getting rich, just like her friend Max. Together they came up with a plan. A rich businessman named Frederick lived in their town, but he didn't think of marrying Diana. He had a wife, Anna, married for almost 20 years. Everything was fine. Except for one thing, Anna couldn't have children. Frederick didn't spare money. He took her to clinics, brought in doctors from abroad. Anna underwent numerous procedures, but she didn't get pregnant. Diana knew about this. She worked part-time as a nurse's aide at a reproduction center. She saw Anna and Frederick and was aware of the situation. At the right moment, she approached the inconsolable Anna. "I can carry a child for you," she said. "I accidentally overheard. I feel sorry for you. I need money. I'm young, healthy. I can carry a baby, and your dream will come true." Anna looked at her distrustfully but took her number. She called back. The unhappy woman was ready for anything. She understood she couldn't do it herself. What was wrong if a stranger did it? The main thing was that there would be a child. Frederick supported his wife. Diana was implanted with Frederick and Anna's embryo. The child took. Diana was an ideal surrogate mother at first. She took vitamins, visited doctors, and then she disappeared. She unexpectedly vanished from the town, leaving Anna and Frederick in the dark. They were already imagining themselves as parents, had prepared the nursery. Anna cried. Frederick searched. No one understood what had happened, but soon it became clear. The disappearance was part of a plan devised by Max and Diana. Diana didn't plan to just give birth and hand over the child. They had been promised money for an apartment, but Diana and Max dreamed of more, shaking a fortune out of Frederick. They were going to Thailand, buy an apartment, live as they pleased. Diana needed to hide. There was no money to rent accommodation. But Max knew that Eleanor lived in the neighboring town, lonely, trusting, easy to deceive. He found out accidentally from an acquaintance at the factory. It would be a good place to stay. No one would look for her there. Everything went smoothly. Diana pretended to be a distressed person in the parking lot. Eleanor took the bait and invited her in. "But wait," Eleanor interrupted. "How did Max know about me?" "His acquaintance from your factory works there," Owen explained. "He accidentally mentioned that there was this Eleanor." When Max said his girlfriend was a surrogate mother, the acquaintance mentioned that you dreamed of having a child. Max is a cunning fox. He seized on it, sniffed around. They followed you and set up the meeting. "Sorry, Aunt Ellie, but you acted foolishly." "I know." Eleanor didn't argue. It was true. Diana called Frederick. He left money in designated places, and Max picked it up. They had accumulated a fortune. But it wasn't enough for them. Greed ruined them. And chance helped. You came back early and overheard. The rest is clear. You left the photo. I ran it through the database, found a match. Frederick did go to the police after all, quietly, without a fuss. If Diana had seen her pictures, who knows what she would have done to the child. "Indeed," Eleanor said. "What now?" "Everything's fine now. Diana is where she should be, under supervision. And right now, she's in labor in the prison infirmary. The child will appear any minute. Diana won't have time for anything. Then the baby will be given to the parents. That's the fate. Didn't even have time to be born and went through so much." "In labor right now?" Eleanor became anxious. She had a crib at home for this baby. The infant's fate was not indifferent to her. "Can I find out if everything's all right?" "Of course, Aunt Ellie. I'll call you back. Don't worry, go home. Only, we conducted an arrest there. Your place is probably a mess. We tracked dirt in." "It's all right." The house was silent. Eleanor was used to the smiling Clara, that is, Diana, living here. Now she was alone again. No more shared dinners, conversations. No baby would be placed in the crib prepared with love. Yes, Clara Diana had managed to wound the woman who had sheltered her out of naivety. And Frederick and Anna. Eleanor couldn't imagine what they had gone through. But they would be fine. Their daughter would be born, and thanks to her, Eleanor, the girl would be in safe hands, not in the power of criminals for whom she was just an object. So, it wasn't in vain. Eleanor sighed, filled a bucket with water, and began to wash the floors. The police had indeed brought in dirt. Eleanor walked up to Annie and picked her up. The girl was growing quickly. She was quite heavy. But it was a pleasant weight. The little one wrapped her arms around Eleanor's neck and kissed her cheek. At that moment, Eleanor was happy. She knew that the girl sincerely loved her, missed her when the nanny took a day off. Eleanor herself missed her very much and tried not to leave the house. But sometimes there were urgent matters. "I had a dream about the mean aunt again," Annie whispered confidentially in her ear. She wanted to take me away. It's just a dream, Eleanor smiled, tucking a strand of light hair behind her ear. I know, but she often appears in my dreams. She's beautiful, but mean. Eleanor sighed. Annie couldn't know what happened before she was born. But why did she dream of a mean, beautiful aunt who resembled Diana? Eleanor discussed this with Anna. They didn't know what to think. Did the little one somehow remember something in the womb? Eleanor became very good friends with Anna. They were the same age, saw eye to eye, understood each other. Both had a dream of motherhood and pain. Anna managed to become a mother. Eleanor was now the godmother and nanny. Anna and Frederick worked a lot. The girl needed looking after. They were afraid to hire someone off the street after what had happened. They had had a sad experience and didn't want to go through something similar again. The idea of meeting the woman who had saved Annie came to Frederick. He decided that Eleanor was a kind, responsible person, since she had sheltered Diana. Naive, but that was better than cunning. Frederick and Anna came to Eleanor 2 weeks after Diana's arrest. They had the sleeping baby with them. Eleanor couldn't take her eyes off the girl for a long time. She looked, smiled, rejoiced that she was in the hands of loving parents. The couple thanked Eleanor for her help. If it weren't for you, I can't imagine what would have happened to our Annie, to us, Anna said, her voice trembling. Tears welled up in her turquoise eyes. It was clear that she hadn't fully processed everything yet. But what? What did I do? Eleanor was embarrassed. It was a coincidence that I came back at the right time. Just a fortunate turn of events. It must be fate. We have a business proposal for you, Frederick announced. We are looking for a nanny, and you are the person we can trust. How does that sound? Eleanor was speechless. Joy overwhelmed her. In a few minutes, she had become attached to Annie and these kind people. Such a proposal. There was nothing to think about, of course, she agreed. And now 3 years had passed. Eleanor lived in the guest house at Frederick and Anna's, happily taking care of Annie. Her dream had finally come true. In a peculiar way, of course, but still. She didn't become a caregiver or a mother as she had wanted, but she had the most beloved little girl to care for, and reliable friends, Frederick and Anna. Close people. Now Eleanor was not alone. The woman carried Annie into the house, sat her at the table, and placed a bowl of porridge with fruit in front of her. Well, a fairy tale? Eleanor asked. Yes, a fairy tale. The little one clapped her hands. About a princess who was taken by a wicked witch, but then everything turned out well. All right, Eleanor smiled. Listen, just don't forget to eat. Annie nodded and diligently began to eat. Eleanor couldn't help but smile again. She was truly happy.